Hi everyone, it's Nicole Nowasad here today for Jillibean Soup, and today we're going to talk all about using some of those little tiny paper strips to create a border on your scrapbook project. So I have a whole bunch of strips of paper here that I've cut from the Spoonful of Soul collection. I've cut them in 3 different sizes. There's a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, and a 3/4 inch size. There's really no wrong size to do something like this, but those are just the 3 sizes that I chose. And you don't really need a lot of paper for this, so if you have any strips just lying around, feel free to use those. You don't need to have those specific measurements. And I'm actually just going to cut those down into 6-inch strips just to make them a little more manageable. And in the end, I actually have way too many strips, so if you want to kind of cut as you go, you could do that too. I have a plain piece of cardstock here that I'm going to completely cover, so I've used a color that I don't really use very often, and I've just gone ahead and cut a white 10 by 10 piece of white cardstock because that's going to kind of cover the middle of my layout. I'm cutting some 2-inch squares just from some coordinating pattern paper just to kind of block out those corners. You could definitely be a little more fancy when it comes to the corners and bevel the edges and stuff like that, but I honestly really want to keep this very simple and create this fun background without a lot of stress, so I'm not really too worried about that. And at this point, once I have those squares in place, it's just a matter of laying my strips of paper along that bordered edge. So what I'm doing is just really randomly placing the different widths and colors of the strips of paper along the edge. And as you can see, I'll just trim off the excess and save that excess because you have more than enough to do a whole other row along another edge of your project. So I've just kind of sorted them back into the different widths just so it's easier for me to grab as I move along. And I'm kind of just really being mindful now that I don't have 2 pink papers directly across from each other. I want to have them slightly staggered. And if I'm using 2 gray pieces, for example, I'm not using the same width on one side of the project to the other. No rhyme or reason for that. I just feel like that kind of helps the eye move nicely around your project, and you won't have everything won't be too linear. So that's really the idea. Now I'm turned my project and I decided I was going to go this way again with my strips of paper, and I realized that some of the patterns I'd cut earlier look obviously different on when you turn them horizontally. So I did go ahead with some other paper and cut them so that my scallops on that scallopy paper was also up and down instead of tilted on its side. Totally your preference, but I decided to go ahead and do that. And you can see here some of the pieces I'm not really being fussy about them lining up nicely in the middle. I'm not too worried about that because they are going to be covered up with that cardstock later on. So I'm using all those little bits of paper that I possibly can just to fill in my border all around the page. And again, doing the same thing where I don't want to kind of line up too many of the same color side by side each other or directly across if I can help it. And then cutting all the excess off. This would be really easy to do for a card background, so all those paper strips I still have remaining, I've saved because I know I'm going to use them for another project. Now to kind of make those squares in the corner not quite so square, because that will stand out a little bit because everything else is so small stripped, I'm just taking some of those strips of paper and moving them horizontally and vertically over top of those squares just to kind of keep that pattern a little bit, but not make it so blocky in the corners. So just tiny little bits going vertically and horizontally just to kind of make that a little less obvious that it's a larger block of paper in the corner. And again, you could have just used smaller strips, but I just decided to do it that way. No rhyme or reason. Sometimes you just make a decision when in the moment and you just have to go with it. I decided this would kind of look good stitched. I didn't want to stitch all the different pattern strips of paper, so I just made a bit of a border around the edge of that strip just to kind of add like a texture component, just a natural cohesion of all the paper. And then I decided to do the same thing with my inside cardstock. So I'm just taking a simple white thread and going around that inside border of the cardstock and to use inside the page. And the good thing about this is I really haven't used a lot of paper. It looks like I have, but I really haven't. And because my border is so busy, I really want to make sure that I leave the inside of the project fairly neutral. So I have these 2 photos of my daughter cut already, and I thought, the white cardstock was great, but I wanted it just to have like that tiny little washed look in the background. So I'm using some Distress Oxide ink just to blend into the background to add a subtle kind of like golden yellow color. that will float behind my photos just to give it a little bit more pop than that white cardstock would. Now I decided I wanted to add, get some darker droplets of the yellow. So I'm going to go ahead and just tap some of that on. And at first I was going to do that, and then I realized I wanted to kind of take away some of that yellow in some pieces also. So I just added some droplets of water, and because that Distress Oxide ink will remove the color, it took some of that away. And so now I'm going to add some of those more bolder color of yellow just to have some darker kind of droplets. And I set that aside to dry really quick, clean up my workspace because I don't like a mess, and get going on to the rest of my layout. I'm just going to lightly dab this off because I don't want those droplets to be really overpowering. I am going to use foam tape around the edge of my cardstock here just to kind of pop it up a little bit over top of the pattern strips. It just creates like a nice little easy break for your eye when you're looking at your page later on. And I just like the look of foam tape. It adds like a nice easy dimension. I'm a bit of a foam tape addict. All right, so now I have my background all in place. I'm going to take my 2 circular photos that I cut, and now I want to just finish off with a title and some journaling. So I've decided to use these Spoonful of Soul foam stickers. These are like the best things ever. So I'm just using a paper piercer here and just lining them up nicely in the top area of my project. If you don't want to eyeball it like I'm doing, you could definitely line those stickers up on a short, like a ruler, or even along the edge of the clear backing that comes in this sheet, or even a piece of pattern paper or something, just to kind of keep them lined up. But I'm going to trust my eye at this point and hope that these are fairly lined up, and just line those foam stickers up. I love that font. It's just so pretty. Now, I did initially think I was going to go ahead and fussy cut a whole bunch of little flowers from that really pretty piece of paper there from the Spoonful of Soul collection, but then I thought, I don't want to do that. I'm going to use these die cuts because they're just as lovely and the work's already done for me. So I'm going to start off by kind of fooling around with some ideas I had to get more circles onto the background. I thought about using this embroidery hoop die cut, but it was just kind of too much floral for me. So I decided to add this large grouping because I thought that was really pretty and it drew in all the colors from those paper strips. And then I went ahead and just chose some of those die cuts that are in the Spoonful of Soul die cut pack. And I am going to go ahead and just layer those with foam dots all around kind of my photo area. I'm kind of trying to vary the size and the color of the flowers just so I get kind of little pops of those colors all throughout my design. And I'm just using tiny little bits of foam adhesive just for the ends of the flowers, so that where the stem is, it's more flat, and then the top part where the flower is a little more popped up. So you kind of get a little bit of dimension to when you put those pea pod part die cuts down. I'm just going to arrange them honestly just around my photos here. I want to leave that bottom right kind of corner section fairly open a little bit. I want to put some strip journaling in there. So I'm going to leave that kind of open, and once I have the larger die cuts down like I have here, then I'm going to start filling in a little bit with these smaller ones. I decided to use one of these little label tabs along the edge of one of my photos, and then I'm going to go in with some of these smaller little blue flowers that are really pretty and really easy to just kind of like toss in around your design to add pops of color. There is one little circle die cut I do end up using, so I'm going to stick that in here. I think that nice, almost like a minty teal green color pops in really nice. I finish it off with my journaling strips, as well as some of those super fun epoxy dots that coordinate with this collection. And that's really it. So it doesn't take a lot of work to make a paper strip border for your project. I hope you're going to give this one a try, because I know if you're like me, you have tons of scraps in your stash. Let's use that stuff and make pretty projects. So I hope you like this one. I'll see you again soon on the Jillibean Soup blog. Bye-bye.